Have you ever wondered what truly happens in hospitals after midnight? Most of us think of hospitals as places of healing, where doctors and nurses fight against time to save lives. But in some corners of Indonesia, especially in old hospitals with long histories, there are whispers of things that medicine cannot cure and logic cannot explain. Tonight, let me take you to Bali. Beyond the beaches, the dances, and the celebrations of life, there is a building that hides a different face of the island. A hospital, large, old, and still standing proud since the colonial era. To tourists, it's invisible, just another structure in the middle of the city. But for the locals, for the nurses, the doctors, and the patients who have stayed there overnight, it's a place that carries more than just memories of the sick. They say that after midnight, when the corridors fall silent, and even the sound of heart monitors seem too loud, something else walks the halls. Shadows where there should be none. Voices calling names that don't belong. A chilling presence that makes even the bravest night shift nurse hold their breath. One nurse, Ayu, who worked there for years, decided to share her story. She had faced countless emergencies, seen patients breathe their last, and endured sleepless shifts. But what happened one night on the second floor of that hospital still makes her tremble when she talks about it. That night began like any other, quiet, almost boring. But in hospitals, the quiet is never normal. It's the kind of silence that makes you notice every flickering lamp, every creak of the old floor, every whisper of the wind through half-open windows. And sometimes silence means something is waiting. And Ayu was about to find out that some patients never check out. Ayu remembered it clearly. It was a Tuesday night, a shift she almost didn't take. She had swapped schedules with another nurse because she wanted the following weekend off. At first, she thought it was a lucky trade. But later, she would wonder if that night had chosen her instead. The clock had just passed 1:45 a.m. The hospital was unusually calm. Only a handful of patients occupied the second floor, mostly elderly with chronic illnesses. The kind who rarely pressed the call button unless something serious was happening. Ayu walked the corridor slowly, clipboard in hand, checking each room one by one. Ayu swallowed hard, her throat dry. The floor stand looked ordinary enough, but something about it felt wrong, completely out of place. Slowly, she bent down to look at the floor. The smudges weren't just random streaks. They looked like thin trails of water, as though the stand had just been wheeled from somewhere damp. She touched one with the tip of her shoe. Cold. Wet. But it wasn't just water. There was a faint, metallic scent lingering in the air. She didn't want to admit it, but it smelled almost like rust or blood. She quickly straightened up, hugging her clipboard against her chest. Maybe someone just forgot it, she muttered to herself, forcing her voice into the silence, as though speaking could make it less terrifying. The janitor probably. But before she could finish her thought, she heard it again. Crack, creak, creak. This time it was louder. Not from down the hall. From right behind her. Her heart leapt. She spun around instantly, eyes wide. The corridor stretched empty behind her, the same dim lights humming, the same shadows spilling across the tiles. No one. No bed. Nothing. Yet the sound had been so close, she could almost feel the vibration through the floor. Ayu's chest tightened. She wanted to walk back to the nurse's station, where at least the warm glow of the desk lamp and the presence of her colleague would make her feel safer. But as she took her first step, she saw something move. At the far end of the hallway, just past the flickering light, a figure stood. It was a woman. Her hospital gown was long and pale, hanging loose against her frail body. Her hair fell over her face, long and damp, sticking to her cheeks as though she had just come out of the rain. She wasn't walking. She wasn't even swaying. She was standing perfectly still, both hands gripping the pole of another floor stand, her head tilted ever so slightly as if listening. Ayu froze. The air grew cold around her, and her skin broke out in goosebumps. She knew all the patients on that floor, and none of them matched this figure. None of them should have been standing in the hallway at this hour. For a moment, Ayu considered calling out, asking if the woman needed help. But her voice caught in her throat. Deep inside, she already knew. Patients don't stand like statues. Patients don't appear out of nowhere. And no patient should be smiling in that way, an almost imperceptible curl of lips, hidden beneath the shadow of her hair. The corridor stretched long, dimly lit by old fluorescent lamps. Some flickered, humming faintly as if about to die. The white tiles on the floor were clean, but had that faint yellow tint that old hospitals always seem to have. On her left, room after room with doors half open, shadows stretching onto the hallway. On her right, a long line of windows covered by curtains that swayed slightly in the midnight breeze. Then she heard it. Crack, creak. The sound of wheels turning. Not the smooth roll of a modern bed, but the rusty squeak of an older one. It echoed faintly at first, like it came from the far end of the hall. Ayu stopped, her ears straining. She knew that sound, every nurse did. It was the sound of a patient's bed being pushed across the corridor. But who would be moving a patient at this hour? Her first thought was that it might be the night orderly, moving someone for an emergency scan. But as she stood still, waiting for the figure to appear, the sound kept coming closer. Crack, creak, creak. Yet the hallway in front of her remained empty. Her pulse quickened. She walked forward carefully, the sound seemingly pulling her toward the far end of the corridor. But the closer she got, the stranger it became. The squeak grew louder, sharper, as if the bed was right around the corner. And then silence. Dead silence. Ayu froze, staring into the empty corridor. Nothing. No patient. No orderly. No bed. Still, the air felt heavy, charged, as if someone had just passed by. She shivered and told herself it was nothing. Maybe the sound had come from the floor above or below. Hospitals were full of echoes. That's what she wanted to believe. But as she turned to walk back, she noticed something odd. One of the 4 stands was standing right in the middle of the corridor. Not by a patient's bedside. Not near the storage room. Just there, in the middle of the hallway, as if someone had left it while in a hurry. The wheels at its base were wet, fresh marks smudging across the floor, glistening under the fluorescent lights. And Ayu swore. Those marks hadn't been there a moment ago. Ayu's knees felt weak, but her training as a nurse kept her rooted in place. She had seen delirious patients before, those who wandered out of their rooms in the middle of the night, confused, half-conscious, mumbling nonsense. That's what she wanted to believe this was. Just another patient. Just another duty. But something deep in her gut screamed otherwise. The woman's hospital gown looked wrong. The fabric was pale, but not the crisp white issued by the hospital. It looked old, yellowed with time, and stained faintly in patches. Like it had been soaked, dried, and forgotten. Her 4 bags swayed gently on the pole, but Ayu noticed there was no tube, no needle, nothing connecting it to her arm. Still, Ayu forced herself to speak. "Ibu, are you lost? Let me help you back to your room." Her voice trembled, betraying the calm facade she tried to maintain. The figure didn't answer. Instead, the faint squeak of wheels echoed again. Crack, creak. Only this time, it wasn't the 4 stand moving. The sound was coming from somewhere closer, almost circling her. Ayu whipped her head left, then right. Empty hallway. No beds, no orderlies, no signs of movement. Yet the sound grew sharper, as though a rusty wheel was being dragged in slow, deliberate circles around her. She looked back down the hall. The woman was gone, her chest constricted, panic rising in her throat. She blinked rapidly, scanning every shadow. Just seconds ago, the woman had been there, frozen beneath the flickering light. Now there was only empty space, curtains swaying faintly against the windows. And then, a breath. Soft, ragged, right by her ear. Cold air brushed against the side of her face, raising every hair on her skin. She staggered backward instinctively, her clipboard clattering to the floor. Her eyes darted wildly, but no one was there. She wasn't imagining it. Someone had been close enough to exhale against her cheek. And in that silence, the corridor seemed to whisper, a faint, broken voice carried by the draft. She couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a name. Her name. Ayu. The sound of her own name froze Ayu in place. It wasn't shouted, nor was it groaned like a patient in pain. It was whispered, drawn out, almost intimate, like someone leaning in close just to make sure she heard. Her mind raced. Who could possibly know her name at this hour? None of the patients had the strength to leave their rooms, and her colleague at the nurse's station was 2 corridors away. The voice came again, softer, stretching out syllable by syllable. Ayu. Her stomach dropped. She clutched her arms against her chest, as if to shield herself from the unseen. She bent down quickly to grab her clipboard, desperate for the small comfort of something normal in her hands. But when she straightened up again, her heart almost stopped. The woman was back. This time she was closer, only a few meters away, standing in the middle of the corridor. Her hair fell like a curtain, hiding most of her face, but Ayu could see the outline of her mouth. Lips curved upward in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. And worse, Ayu noticed the 4-pole wasn't upright anymore. It leaned unnaturally toward her, as though something heavy was hanging off it, bending the metal at an impossible angle. The fluorescent light above flickered once, twice, then steadied. In that brief darkness, Ayu thought she saw the woman move, a twitch too quick to follow. Her heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of the nurse's station, but her feet refused to obey. Instead, she found herself whispering, "What do you want?" No reply. Only the wheels creaked again. Crack, creak, creak. This time, it came from behind the woman, echoing down the corridor as though a bed was being pushed toward them both. But the corridor remained empty. And then Ayu noticed something else, her name tag. The small plastic card pinned to her uniform. It was missing. Her blood turned cold. She had been wearing it at the start of her shift. She always did. But now the pin on her chest was empty. And in the woman's hand, half hidden beneath her sleeve, something gleamed under the dim light. A name tag. Her name tag. Ayu's breath caught in her throat. She blinked hard, hoping it was just a trick of the light. But no, there it was, the little plastic rectangle she knew so well, dangling from the woman's pale fingers. Her name printed in bold letters, AUS, clear as day. Her chest tightened. How? She hadn't seen anyone near her all night. She would have felt if someone unclipped it from her uniform. The thought made her skin crawl. Had something brushed against her earlier, when she felt that icy breath on her cheek. The woman slowly tilted her head to the side, the strands of her wet-looking hair shifting just enough to reveal one eye. It was sunken, hollow, with dark bruises shadowing the skin around it. The gaze was fixed on Ayu, unblinking. Then, as if mocking her fear, the woman lifted the name tag higher. The small plastic card swung gently back and forth, catching the dim light with every motion. Ayu, the whisper came again, but this time Ayu could see it, the woman's lips moving in sync with the sound. That was the breaking point. Ayu stumbled backward, her shoes squeaking against the tiles. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat felt locked, as if the air itself was gripping it tight. She forced her body to turn, to run. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead of her, each fluorescent light buzzing and flickering as she sprinted beneath them. But with every step she took, the squeak of wheels followed. Crack, creak, creak. Not behind her, not ahead of her, but right beside her, as though an invisible bed was being pushed along, keeping pace with her frantic run. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she didn't dare look to her side. She knew deep down that if she did, she would see something she was never meant to. Finally, the glow of the nurse's station came into view. The warm yellow lamp, the stacks of paperwork, the faint sound of a radio left on low volume. Safety. Normalcy. She pushed herself harder, nearly tripping as she stumbled into the light. Her colleague, Ronnie, looked up in shock. Ayu, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Ayu gasped, her chest heaving. She wanted to explain, to tell Ronnie everything, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she simply pointed down the corridor. Someone's there, she managed to whisper. But when Ronnie leaned over to look, the hallway was empty. Silent. Perfectly ordinary. And on the counter beside them, sitting neatly as if it had been placed there with care, was Ayu's missing name tag. Ayu's stomach lurched when she saw it, her name tag lying innocently on the counter. The same name tag she had just seen dangling from that woman's fingers only moments ago. Her trembling hand reached out slowly, hesitating. She half expected it to vanish, or worse, feel ice cold when she touched it. But when her fingers closed around it, it felt perfectly normal. Warm even, as if it had been sitting there for hours. Ronnie frowned, clearly confused. What are you talking about? You must have dropped it earlier. I picked it up when I was making rounds. Ayu's lips parted, but no words came out. She wanted to argue, to explain that she had seen the woman holding it, had heard her name whispered in the darkness. But how could she explain something like that without sounding insane? Ronnie studied her pale face, and the way she was gripping the name tag with white knuckles. You should sit down for a bit. You're exhausted, Ayu. Maybe even dehydrated. These night shifts can really mess with your head. Exhausted, dehydrated, hallucinating. Those were the logical answers. And yet, deep in her chest, Ayu knew what she had seen wasn't just a figment of her imagination. The smell of rust in the air, the sound of wheels echoing in the empty corridor, the icy breath against her skin. Those details were too vivid, too real. Still, she forced herself to sit. Her body shook as she tried to steady her breathing. But even as she sat there, pretending to calm down, her ears caught something faint, barely audible. A whisper. From down the corridor. Ayu! Her skin prickled. She looked at Ronnie, hoping she had heard it too. but Ronnie was scribbling notes in a chart, oblivious, humming softly under her breath. Ayu gripped the edge of the desk, her heart pounding again. The corridor stretched into silence, as though daring her to look, to walk back into its shadows. And then, from one of the rooms at the far end, a light flicked on. Room 207. But Ayu knew that room was empty. The patient had passed away earlier that week. Sari tried to calm herself, taking a deep breath, though the air felt colder, piercing straight into her bones. She clutched the patient's record book tightly in her hands, its cover already crumpled, forcing herself to focus back on her duties. Yet the feeling, the sense that someone was watching her, only grew stronger. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of a dark shadow darting swiftly down the hallway, toward the old operating room. That hallway was infamous. The operating room had been abandoned for years, ever since a patient died in the middle of surgery during a sudden blackout. Stories had circulated among the newer nurses, whispered tales of eerie happenings, though most dismissed them as campfire horror meant to scare newcomers. But tonight, those stories seemed to crawl out of the shadows, pressing close around her. With cautious steps, Sari moved forward, trying to convince herself it was nothing. The door to the old operating room stood slightly ajar, creaking faintly as it swayed with the draft. Inside, the darkness pressed heavy, broken only by the dim light spilling in from the corridor, just enough to outline the operating table, its shape eerily resembling a body lying still. Suddenly, the sharp clang of surgical tools hitting the floor echoed from within. Sari flinched, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She stared into the gloom, searching desperately for a logical explanation. A rat, maybe, or the wind. But then her eyes caught something that froze the blood in her veins. On the table, faintly, was the figure of a man. His face was pale, his eyes covered with a blood-stained bandage, his body stretched out as though freshly deceased. The form was not solid, more like a haze, yet real enough to make every hair on her body stand on end. And then, slowly, the figure turned its head toward her. Sari staggered back, nearly dropping the record book. Her breath caught in her throat as the figure on the table lifted its head higher, the motion unnaturally slow, as though bones were creaking with every movement. The blood-stained bandage across its eyes began to seep, fresh crimson trickling down its hollow cheeks. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out, her voice stuck, strangled by pure terror. The air in the operating room grew heavier, pressing down on her chest, forcing her heart to pound harder and faster. The fluorescent light in the hallway flickered violently, casting strobe-like flashes across the apparition, making it seem as if the body was moving closer with every blink. And then she heard it, a rasping voice, dry and broken, like lungs that had long forgotten how to breathe. "Nurse." The word dragged itself out of the darkness, filling the room with a suffocating dread. Sari's knees nearly gave way, but she clung to the doorframe, her knuckles white. "You left me in the dark." The voice grew louder, the figure shifting slightly, its bandaged head trembling as if in agony. The sound of surgical tools scraping across the tiled floor sent shivers running up her spine. Sari forced herself to step back, her mind screaming to run, but her body locked in place, frozen by the oppressive weight of the scene before her. And then, in the silence that followed, came the sound that truly broke her, slow, deliberate footsteps echoing across the room. But the figure on the table hadn't moved. Something else was inside with her. The footsteps drew closer, steady and unnervingly calm. Tap, tap, tap. Each step rang against the cold tiles, but Sari couldn't see where it was coming from. Her eyes darted left and right, trying to pierce through the suffocating dark of the abandoned operating room. The bandaged figure on the table was still there, motionless now, as though it had never spoken at all. But the footsteps continued, circling, closing in. Then, out of the shadows at the far corner of the room, a second shape began to emerge. At first, it was no more than a ripple in the gloom, like smoke curling upward. But as it stepped forward, it took on the outline of a man in a surgeon's coat, his mask dangling loosely, exposing a mouth twisted in an unnatural grin. His eyes were hollow sockets, black pits that seemed to drink in the dim light around him. Sari's chest tightened. Her pulse hammered so loudly in her ears it nearly drowned out the sound of his voice when he finally spoke. "You didn't save him," the surgeon whispered, his tone both accusing and mournful. "Now, who will save you?" Her back pressed against the cold doorframe. The urge to flee screamed through her veins, but her legs refused to obey. The air stank of antiseptic mixed with the metallic tang of blood, as if the past itself was leaking back into the present. The surgeon took another step closer. And in that moment, the bandaged patient on the table sat up abruptly, his head jerking toward her, his jaw opening wide in a silent scream. The room erupted with the sound of clattering tools, every scalpel and clamp rattling violently, as though an invisible storm had torn through the place. Sari finally found her voice. A strangled cry tore out of her throat as she stumbled backward into the hallway, only to find that the door behind her had slammed shut on its own. She was trapped. Sari's trembling hands clawed at the doorknob, twisting it again and again, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the hospital itself had locked her inside, refusing to let her out. Behind her, the sound of dragging footsteps grew louder, heavier, echoing off the tiled walls. She forced herself to turn around. The surgeon's figure now stood only a few feet away, his coat soaked in dark stains that shimmered faintly under the flickering light. In his hand, he held a rusty surgical saw, its blade jagged and dripping with something that gleamed unnaturally red. Beside him, the bandaged patient had fully risen, his body convulsing as though every bone inside him was breaking. His head lolled to one side, blood seeping endlessly through the cloth over his eyes. "Don't leave me, nurse," the patient moaned, stumbling forward with jerky, puppet-like steps. Sari pressed her back hard against the door, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "This isn't real, this isn't real," she whispered to herself, but her body knew otherwise. The cold, the smell, the oppressive weight in the air, it was too real. The surgeon lifted the saw, tilting his head as if examining her, deciding where to cut. His grin widened, splitting unnaturally until it stretched nearly ear to ear. Then, without warning, the bandaged patient let out a guttural shriek and lunged toward her. The sound rattled through her skull, so piercing it felt like her bones were vibrating. Sari ducked just in time, the patient's grasp missing her by inches, his blood-stained fingers clawing at the door instead. In desperation, she grabbed the record book still in her hand and hurled it across the room. The objects inside, loose notes and clipped reports, scattered like leaves in a storm. For a brief second, both the surgeon and the patient paused, their hollow eyes following the fluttering papers as though bound to them. That was all she needed. Sari darted sideways, her body slamming into a rolling tray. Surgical instruments clattered across the floor, creating a deafening metallic storm. She stumbled toward the far side of the room, heart pounding, lungs burning, praying for any exit. Her eyes landed on a narrow service door half hidden in the shadows. If she could reach it in time, maybe, just maybe, she had a chance. Sari sprinted toward the service door, her shoes slipping against the polished tiles as her body begged her to collapse. She slammed into the handle with her shoulder, and to her relief, it gave way with a loud metallic screech. The door burst open into a narrow passageway lined with rusting pipes and dangling wires. The air here was thicker, warmer, and carried the pungent stench of mold mixed with disinfectant. Her chest heaved as she tried to steady her breathing, but the sounds behind her wouldn't stop. The dragging steps, the scraping of the surgical saw, they were following. She forced herself deeper into the passage. The walls seemed to close in, suffocatingly tight, as if the hospital itself was folding around her. Faint light bulbs swung from the ceiling, some burnt out, others flickering weakly, casting long, distorted shadows along the walls. Shadows that didn't always match her own movements. A sudden metallic bang rang out behind her, echoing through the cramped hall. She spun around, but there was nothing, only the swaying bulb, its light dancing erratically. Yet the silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was as if the entire building was holding its breath, waiting. Sari pressed forward, her eyes catching a faded sign that read Morgue, with an arrow pointing down the hall. Her stomach dropped. Of all places, she couldn't end up there. Not now. But the footsteps returned, this time from ahead of her. Slow, deliberate. Someone, or something, was waiting in the shadows beyond the flickering bulbs. Her instincts screamed to turn back, but when she glanced over her shoulder, the corridor behind her had changed. The service door she had come through was gone, replaced by a solid wall of cracked tiles. Her pulse roared in her ears. There was no going back. From the direction of the morgue, a gurney rolled into view on its own, its wheels squealing in protest as if forced forward by unseen hands. On it lay a body covered with a white sheet. The sheet twitched, then rose, and slowly, agonizingly slowly, a pale hand slipped out, clutching the edge. The sheet slid back inch by inch, as if an unseen hand were peeling it away. Sari's breath caught as a face emerged, gaunt, waxy skin stretched too tightly across sharp bones. The corpse's eyes were closed, but its lips twitched, curling into the faintest, most grotesque smile. Sari stumbled back, her shoulders slamming into the damp wall, yet she couldn't tear her gaze away. The figure sat upright in a jerky, unnatural motion, joints cracking like dried branches snapping underfoot. Its chest expanded, exhaling a long, rattling breath that smelled of rot and stagnant water. Slowly, its eyelids fluttered open to reveal clouded, milky eyes that stared straight at her. "Join us," the voice rasped, though its mouth barely moved. The words felt less like sound, and more like they were echoing directly inside her skull. Sari shook her head violently, whispering to herself, "This isn't real, this isn't real." But her legs betrayed her, trembling so hard she could barely stand. The corpse swung its legs off the gurney, bare feet slapping wetly against the floor. With every step it took toward her, the lights overhead flickered more violently, until entire sections of the hallway plunged into pitch black. The air grew unbearably heavy, pressing down on her chest like a weight. And then, she realized the gurney wasn't alone. From the darkness, more bodies stirred. One sheet after another rippled, rose, and slid away, revealing hollow faces, twisted jaws, and lifeless eyes that blinked awake. A chorus of rattling breaths filled the corridor, each one dragging her deeper into despair. The corpses began to shuffle toward her, their movements unsteady but purposeful, forming a wall of death that advanced slowly down the hall. Her back was against the cold tiles. The path behind her was sealed. The only way left was forward, toward the morgue doors that now loomed wide open, spilling a void of absolute blackness. A darkness that seemed to be waiting for her. Sari's lungs burned as panic clawed at her chest. The hallway ahead yawned open into the morgue, its doorway a black hole that swallowed all light. Behind her, the corpses shuffled closer, their hollow eyes fixed on her, their breath rattling in unison like a grotesque choir. The air thickened with the smell of decay, making her gag. She pressed herself tighter against the wall, desperately searching for an escape. But the bodies closed in, their cold, clammy fingers brushing against her arms, her hair, tugging at her clothes. The faint scrape of their nails against her skin sent shivers racing down her spine. One corpse leaned closer, its jaw dangling loose as it whispered, "No one leaves." Its breath was icy, sour with the scent of the grave. Sari screamed and shoved it away, forcing her body to move. With every ounce of strength, she pushed through the narrow gap between two staggering figures. Their hands clawed at her, tearing strands of her hair, scratching her skin, but she broke free, running blindly toward the morgue's open doors. The moment she crossed the threshold, the temperature plummeted. The air turned sharp, stabbing at her lungs with every breath. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the flickering light from the hallway. She could no longer hear the corpses behind her. For a fleeting second, she thought she had escaped them. But then she heard it. A faint sound, like dozens of metal drawers sliding open all at once. One by one, the morgue storage compartments groaned, their doors creaking wide. And from each drawer, pale hands began to emerge, scraping against steel as they pulled themselves into the room. The darkness shifted. Sari could see them now, rows upon rows of bodies, crawling out of their resting places, filling the room with the sound of dragging limbs and gnashing teeth. Her scream was swallowed by the void. The morgue had awakened, and it wanted her. Sari stumbled backward, her palms slick with sweat, her breath ragged. The morgue was alive, the dead stirring in every corner, their pale eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Dozens of corpses dragged themselves from the drawers, their joints snapping, their mouths stretching open as if to scream. Yet only silence filled the air. Her back hit the wall. There was nowhere left to run. The icy air pressed down on her chest like an invisible hand, stealing her breath. In that suffocating silence, one corpse stepped forward. Its face was half-rotted, its lips torn, but the eyes were sharp, almost human. It leaned close until Sari could feel the cold dripping from its skin. "You belong here now," it rasped, its voice like dry leaves. The world tilted. Sari screamed, but the sound was swallowed into the void. The corpses surged forward, their hands clawing at her arms, her legs, her throat. The darkness consumed her in a suffocating wave of death. And then silence. The next morning, another nurse came to start her shift. The corridors were quiet, too quiet. When she reached the morgue, the doors were closed, but the faint sound of scratching echoed from within. Sari was never seen again. But sometimes, when the night is still, the nurses swear they can hear her voice echoing through the halls, soft, broken, begging for help. The hospital never speaks of it, but those who know, avoid the morgue after midnight, because Sari is still there, waiting. And that's the chilling story of Sari, the nurse who vanished into the morgue's darkness. Some say she never left the hospital, and her whispers still echo through the empty halls. But what do you think? Could it all be explained as exhaustion and fear? Or is there something truly unexplainable haunting that hospital in Bali? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever had a strange or terrifying experience in a hospital yourself, tell your story. We'd love to read it. Who knows, maybe your story will be the next one we tell here.